Greetings! This video isn't going to be one of my main ones. The purpose of this video is actually to tell you guys the definitions of various technical terms I'll probably end up using in my channel, as well as the various notations I'm going to use in this channel, so that everybody's life is simpler for both of us. Both of us, so both me and you, the audience. So, let's begin. First of all, the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA for short. This is a world standard method of writing sounds so that professionals can communicate with each other faster. I'll probably do a video sometime explaining how the whole system works properly, but it's covered in this video because all my sound notations in the videos will be written in IPA. This gives us a two-way advantage. I don't have to keep working with different sound notation systems whilst I'm making videos, although I will have to go and translate that. So I'll do all the hard work, so you guys don't have to. You guys get the advantage that you'll simply have to work with one system instead of having to look at a new system every video. It's actually more advantageous than if I was to use English, because first of all, English doesn't have enough sounds to cover all of the ones that can appear, and secondly, English spelling is a bit insane, so the International Phonetic Alphabet is probably a better choice. Of course, even IPA has variable forms for writing certain aspects of the system, so I'm going to just quickly go through which system I'm going to use for what. I'll be using this diacritic system and this system for tone, so altogether as one single sound might look like this. While speaking, I will be using this system for individual sounds, or consonants rather, consonant sounds. The vowels act as placeholders, they're not part of the sound, but it gives me more control in saying the sound, and you get to hear how a vowel will flow into the consonant, as well as how the consonant will flow into a vowel immediately after it. As for vowels, they could just be on their own. Each individual vowel will be itself. Okay, word definitions. First, language. In this case, I mean only spoken language, a way for people to communicate with each other by talking. Two different languages. This will be two ways of speaking where two people will be talking to each other and they will not be able to understand each other. So an example of two different languages would be English and German. Dialect. Dialect is a bit like a language, but it's where two people would be able to talk to each other, and they will sound different, but be able to understand each other. So an example of two dialects would be British English and American English. They sound different, but you still can understand the other person. A dialect continuum. This is where things get a little complicated. Let's say I have 5 people. Each speaks with a dialect of each other, so they speak slightly differently to each other, but they can understand each other. Now turn them into a chain. So person 1 speaks in one way, person 2 who's next to them speaks slightly differently, then person 3 speaks slightly differently to 2, and then 4 slightly differently from 3, and 5 from 4. If you go along each step of this, they're just dialects, so you could say they all speak one language. But if you were to then take person 1 and person 5 and get them to talk to each other, they would not be able to understand each other and would technically speak different languages. Linguists sort of gave up on trying to work out whether a dialect continuum is a language or dialect, so they just called the whole thing one dialect continuum. Proto-language. A proto-language is the last spoken common ancestor of 2 or more languages. So the common ancestor to Spanish and French would be Latin. Or possibly for English and German would be West Germanic, and things like that. A language family is the name given to all of these languages put together. So all the Romance languages is the Romance family, and its proto-language would be Latin. A branch would be an individual set of these languages within the family that are even more closely related to each other than the rest of them. So Spanish, Catalan and Portuguese would count as the Iberian branch of Romance, because they're more closely related than they are to, let's say, Romanian. A language isolate is an individual language, one language, just one, that is unrelated to any other language in the world. An example of a language isolate would be Basque. A diacritic, this is basically any symbol written around the main letter. So you could have diacritic accents, like these things, or you could have a diacritic vowel, like these things, or you could have what the International Phonetic Alphabet uses, which is diacritic all sorts of things, which are these things. A phoneme. This is the official term used by linguists for a sound. So one phoneme is one sound. Morpheme, with an M on the end, not N. Morpheme is something quite different. Morpheme is a small part of a language that can't work as a word on its own, but does carry some meaning. So an example in English would be ness, N-E-S-S. It's on its own, it's not really a word, but if you were to say thickness, that ness has a meaning in the word thickness. Thick is different to thickness. And finally, here's the most random one of the lot. Haplogroups. This is actually a genetics term. It's what geneticists, I think that's a word, what geneticists use to track human migration. So a population will tend to develop similar mutations in their genes, and a geneticist will look at these mutations within the population, and they will use it to track where the population has been throughout history by looking at the DNA of skeletons from history, of course, and comparing with the modern genes of that population. It's given the name haplogroups, and an example of a haplogroup would be haplogroup Q, which is the one used by these people. Thank you for watching.